Well, I want to greet all of you in Jesus' holy name. It's good to be here again this morning, even though I'm standing up here. Don't feel quite ready for this, but we're going to see how it goes. Um, I want to thank Wes for those songs. They fit in well with what I have to share this morning. Looking at a few different scriptures and just trying to impress upon us again and reminding myself how powerful is our God. And do I tap into that power on a daily basis? Do I remember that I need God every day, taking me through that? So I thought we'd start out with a creation story, just to see how mighty and great our God is. I'm going to go pretty fast over part of it. If you want to open up to the very first book, very first chapter, it starts out in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes on. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I just wrote down here, on the first day, God created light and separated it from darkness. He created day, night. And on the second day, God created an expanse to separate the water and create the sky, giving us the clouds, the land. And on the third day, God created the land, plants, and trees. So there was morning and evening now. There was land, there was plants, there was trees. And then God created the sun, moon, and stars for light. On the fifth day, God created the creatures of the sea and the birds. Now he's starting to create living things. On the sixth day, God created animals and man. And that's where I want to kind of jump in there on creating Adam. I'm going to start reading in verse 24. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." I'm going to skip down to chapter 2, verse 4. It says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created." I should back up there and just put in there that on the seventh day, God rested. An example for us to keep the seventh day holy. And I had to think there's some discussion about when the seventh day is, but I think the principle is of keeping one day holy. Is it Saturday or is it Sunday? But it's a matter of keeping one day holy for God, resting. And then we go to chapter 2, verse 7. "The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." That's a verse I went to look at a little bit. it's been almost 2 months, I think, that Lamani has been in the hospital. And it just got me thinking about the heart and the body and how we are made. God, it says here that God formed man from the dust in the ground. And earlier it had said that he created humans in his own kind on the sixth day. It sounds like he did it in one day. And if we think of the body and of all that happens in our body to make us the living, breathing humans that we are, and we think of God taking dust, forming that, and giving us a heart that beats with no batteries, no gasoline, no diesel. What really keeps that heart beating? And I did a little bit of research on that. I know I probably don't know that much more than what I did, but there were some facts that jumped out at me that I wanted to share. If we think that God made our bodies in one day, I just wrote down here a couple questions. Did he need any help to figure out where everything went and how everything was supposed to work? If we think of how everything works in our bodies, it's a very amazing God that we have. And then I Googled a little bit on the internet. It says how the heart beats. The sinus node located in the right atrium generates an electrical signal. The signal travels through the atria, causing them to contract and pump blood into the ventricles. The signal travels to the AV node, which slows the signal to allow the ventricles to fill with blood. The AV node sends a signal to the ventricles, causing them to contract and pump blood out of the heart. The ventricles relax and the process starts again. The body automatically adjusts the heartbeat to match activity and surroundings. For example, the heart rate increases when you're active, excited, or scared, and decreases when you're resting. So the heart really keeps us going. But it was like, what really keeps the heart going? That is just the miracle of God, I think, that keeps the heart going. And then having Anita have a heart attack this week, it just struck me again how fragile we really are without God's strength taking us through. So the heart pumps blood, but where does it go? Now, here's something that really stood out to me. It says the human body has billions of blood vessels, including veins, arteries, and capillaries. The total length of all blood vessels in the body is approximately 60,000 miles in a child and 100,000 miles in an adult. So I had to think, if we think of God forming that out of the dust in one day, you don't hear of a doctor opening you up and finding 10,000 miles of blood vessels just dumped in one spot. God knew where every blood vessel was going to make sure that everything worked. So he didn't just, like I wrote down here, how did he have a schematic diagram to make sure that everything was going to work once he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life? Did he have to put him back on the drawing table to change a few things? If you think about it, so often when we try to make something, we get it working about halfway the first time, and then we have to sit back down and try to rewire something and make sure that everything works. God didn't have to do that. God knew right away where everything needed to be to make that everything works. And if you think about the blood vessels going throughout your whole body, it says your cornea is the transparent part of your eye that covers the pupil, the opening at the center of your eye, the iris-colored part of your eye, and the anterior chamber, the fluid-filled inside of your eye. So that's what the cornea is covering. The cornea's transparent nature allows light to pass onto the retina and then to the brain to process what you're seeing. What's interesting is that the only reason your cornea is transparent is that it's only one of two tissues in your body, the other being cartilage, that is entirely free of blood vessels. That is the only two parts of your body that have no blood vessels. And it struck me how that God created all of that in just one day, and then he breathed life, and we were perfect. The bodies worked perfectly. But then, thinking about that, I had to think, well, so God created the heavens and the earth. He created all this stuff. He created us. And then he took a rest on the seventh day. And I had to wonder, well, I didn't have to wonder, but I had to think, like, did God's power stop then? Does he still show us his wonderful works and his power now, all these years later after creation? So I've chosen to read a couple different events that just show more of God's power. Exodus 14, starting at 21. And all of these are very familiar passages, very familiar stories. But for me, I need to be reminded often of what God has done for me and what he can still do. Starting in Exodus 14, verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. And I should maybe back up a little bit. This is where the children of Israel were at the Red Sea. And the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots come off so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, not one of them survived. Just again, showing the power of God, dividing the Red Sea. But here, there's also something else that jumped out at me, is our response to God. The Lord asked Moses to lift up his hand, and he did. And I think God could have parted the Red Sea without that, but it just shows that sometimes God wants action on our parts. And then, Moses was willing to just lift up his arm, and I don't know what Moses was thinking at that time. Was he thinking this is really going to happen? Was he with the other Israelites wondering, what is God going to do? Did God just bring us out here to get rid of us? Or was he really certain that that Red Sea was going to part? But God did. He made it part, and he gave them a way to get away. But then he also took out all of Pharaoh's army. And there was kind of an interesting comment in the bottom here in the commentary. It says, no evidence of this great exodus has been discovered in Egyptian historical records. This was because it was a common practice for Egyptian pharaohs not to record their defeats. They even went so far as to take existing records and delete the names of traitors and political adversaries. Pharaoh would have been especially anxious not to record that his great army was destroyed chasing a band of runaway slaves. Since either the Egyptians failed to record the Exodus or the record has not been found, it is impossible to place a precise date on the event. You know, even Pharaoh lost his entire army, and that did not sit well with him. So somewhere, either it was not recorded or it was lost. So, but then just another description we have of God's mighty power is in Daniel 3. Another very familiar chapter to us, talking about King Nebuchadnezzar making an image of gold. It says it was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. I'm not going to read the whole chapter there, but you know how some of the satraps, the prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all their officials came to Nebuchadnezzar and wanted him to proclaim that people can only worship that gold image. And then here it was where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decided that they would not worship it. They would only worship the true God. Starting in verse 13, it says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, cither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? A very deliberate challenge to our God. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tight, fell into the blazing furnace. Now, human nature would tell us there's no way that those men are going to come out of that furnace. Fire is just something that you cannot survive a blazing furnace like that. It says that the soldiers did not even survive. But then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Again, just the power of God. It says that they couldn't even smell smoke. They couldn't even smell fire on them. They were not singed in any way. But there again, it just jumped out to me, these men were willing to take that chance for their God. They were willing to be burned if needed to be. They didn't back down and let Nebuchadnezzar bully them, because it said, they could have, somewhere in the commentary I read, they could have probably just bowed down, taken the easy way out, and later come back to God and apologize, or God forgives, but they didn't. And that's a challenge for us. Where do I let other people turn me away from God, and then later I have to come back and apologize? There's one more. And I don't think I'll take time to read this, but it did jump out to me again, like Daniel in the den of lions. If you think about a lion, you think about a meat-eating animal that is very powerful, an animal that I would not want to meet up with without some kind of protection. But here again, Daniel was willing to take that risk and to trust God that he would take him through. And when they put Daniel in the lion's den, quite often when we see a picture, a painting, or a picture of the lion's den, there's multiple lions in there. And I'm just going to in verse 21, Daniel 6, verse 21, where King Darius goes back and he goes to the mouth of the lion's den, and he asks for Daniel, and he says, just backing up a little bit, he says, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." And it just, that jumped out to me that God sent one angel into that den of lions where multiple lions were, and he went through and he shut every mouth of those lions. And yeah, it just shows again how powerful, a lion is one of the most powerful animals that we have here on earth. And God can send one angel to shut multiple mouths of lions to where they didn't even touch Daniel all night while he was in there. Just goes to show that if we trust God with our lives, what he can do to take us through life when we come into a difficult situation. He can take us through. He has the power. He's all knowing. He knows the future. If you think back to creation, you think of how he created the heaven and the earth. He created the sun and the moon. And our timetable works off of the sun and the moon. Our day works off of that. And it has been consistent for all these years since creation. So it just goes to show you that God knows the future. He knows what we need. Then one other thought that I want to bring out yet is in the book of Acts. You could say these were all Old Testament miracles that God did, but it didn't stop at the Old Testament either. You get to the book of Acts, chapter 12, that we start looking at Peter as he was in prison. And Peter was one of the apostles that did a lot of preaching and speaking for God. And here's another miracle that God just shows the strength that he has. Starting at verse 1. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the feast of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. And that's when Peter realized what really had happened. And yeah, it just, you think of walking right past guards that were paid to be there to watch, and God blinded their eyes. God let him just walk right out of that prison. Just once again, another miracle of the power of God when we trust him. There was one verse here that really jumped out to me. It said, "So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him." Something that we need to do on a daily basis is to pray for each other. The church knew that Peter was in prison. And it doesn't say that were they assembled or were they each praying at home right then. But later on it does show that the house that he came to, they must have been gathered there because a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. And when she recognized Peter's voice, she went back and exclaimed to all, "Peter is at the door." So they must have been there praying for him. And they told her, "You're out of your mind." They told her when she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the brothers about this," he said, and then he left for another place. Yeah, just amazing how God can work out details. And I had to think of Anita and LaMonica this morning, both, fighting for their lives in the hospital. And I was just thinking, there's two ways of being healed. You can be healed here on earth, where you don't, you can be with family and friends, but there's another way of being healed, and that is going home to heaven. Being healed that way. And I just brought back memories of a couple relatives of mine that, I had to think, does God still do miracles today? We're now past the New Testament, and I think most of you've probably heard this story already of my sister having a brain tumor removed. It'll be, I think it's 15 years this year now. And I remember well the day of the surgery when they came out and told us it's not going well. And the doctor basically that day told us that she will not live. Or if she will live, she will be a vegetable. And 3 days later, she was talking and sitting up in bed. And she now, if you would see her, you would barely know that she ever went through a surgery like that. And the neat thing was the doctor came out and he told us, he said, "You need to pray." And he said that it will be a miracle if she survives. And ever after that, every visit she went back, he would call her the miracle lady. And, just the idea that the doctors acknowledged that it really, truly was a miracle. There was no special doctor that worked on her and saved her. It was only God that saved her that time. And, it made me think again this morning of what our response needs to be when God has something in it, for us to do. And I thought of Anita, of Tyrone sitting there waiting on his wife. And it was a long night, that night that we sat there not knowing if my sister was going to make it or not. And my heart goes out to Tyrone to be sitting there waiting on his wife. And if you look at verse 5, it said, "So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him." There is a response that we have to do. There's a work that we have to do for people like that. And I thought we still have a couple minutes. So I'd like to just have us all get up, gather in small groups, and take a couple minutes to pray for Anita and for LaMonica, and especially for those husbands that are sitting there waiting, for the children that don't know, is their mom going to make it or not? Just for comfort for healing if it's not against God's will. Um, we know that she will be healed one way or another. But it was just a challenge to me again this week to just be proactive, to be reminded that God can do miracles, but we also have our part to do. I remember the night when we were sitting there waiting on Norma. I know there was a lot of people praying for us that night. So, in closing, I'd just like to encourage everyone to use the talents that God has given you for God's glory, for His kingdom, and to be open. You know, when you think of those doctors, and you think of how they work on people, you think of the talents that God has given them to be able to do that. But they didn't just wake up one morning and know how to work on a person's heart. It took a lot of years of school, took a lot of time away from family and other stuff that they could have been doing. And it challenged me, like, how much of my time am I willing to sacrifice for God's work, for the talents that He's given me to be further exercised and to grow. So with that, I think I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes in prayer, and then Travis, I think after 5 minutes or so, you see people are done, I'll turn it back over to you and let you close for Sunday school. So if you want to just get up and just form small groups, we don't have a lot of area that we can spread out, but yeah, just spend some time in prayer for those that really are struggling for their lives right now. So thank you for your attention.